Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're having a wide-ranging discussion of tech management, including something called the innovation tax. We'll find out what that is. And we'll also talk about data and databases, of course, because today I'm joined by Mark Porter, CTO of MongoDB. Mark, thank you for joining me, and Happy New Year's to you.
Happy New Year's to you as well. It's a delight to be here. You did a good lead in there. I have been talking about databases for 40 plus years, and I just can't seem to stop talking about them.
Well, we need databases so someone needs to be talking about databases. I'm glad you are, Mark.
Every
Speak,
application has a database behind it somewhere.
I like that. And, it's funny, databases, they're almost the unsung, hero there. And people talk about cloud, they talk about AI, they talk about, all, cloud native, blah, blah, blah. Databases don't seem as sexy when in reality, databases sort of run the whole world.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I'm excited about databases is because a database makes a promise to its user that is literally one of the strongest promises in computer science. And that promise is of durability and availability and correctness and a bunch of other things, but those are the three. There are no other parts of the computing infrastructure which make those same promises. And so whenever you see some website down, whenever you see some problem, it is most likely the case that there's a database having problems somewhere behind it, because the application infrastructure is stateless and has been able to be made to be much more fault tolerant and much better. And the networking often it has that too. The database, unfortunately, has taken a lot longer to get to that level of reliability and durability and availability. And frankly, that's one of the reasons I came to MongoDB.
Interesting. All right.
Was to actually, I believe that MongoDB, and I know this isn't a brand pitch, but after being in databases for 40 years, I came to the belief that MongoDB has the opportunity to build the magic endpoint that application developers have been looking for so long. And then what I started doing is I started looking at all the things which are making it hard for developers to write applications. And that's where a lot of the stuff you mentioned in your intro about innovation tax has come from.
Well, let's dive right in that. I think it'd be neat to get your sense of where the database market is here in 2022. I mean, there's so much going on in data warehouses. I mean, Snowflake is out there trying to change the world. I mean, what do you see as a couple of trends defining the database market in the year 2022?
So one of the trends is this concept of elasticity in managed services. And we have our Atlas service, other vendors have their managed services. People just have to push the database down to being something they call via an API and stand up, not something they manage themselves. And there's two reasons for that. Number one is because they need to think about their business purpose. They don't want to think about running a database and transactions and backups and all that. But the second reason is because the world is always on now. And no one takes maintenance intervals. There's a certain site I work with that I use personally that takes maintenance intervals once a month. And I'm like, what is a maintenance interval? And so now we have to have things that are up 24/7 by 365. If you just look at the worldwide impact of some of these cloud outages, it's unbelievable. And so users are all over the world 24/7. They're doing things with many applications 24/7. And because many things bring many applications together, one application going down has such an unbelievable blast radius in the productivity of the world. We now, and at MongoDB, this is my direction to our team, I literally want there to be no known reason for the database to go down. Now, the world surprises us, just like it surprises others, but our design point is no known reason for our software to go down.
Okay. And perhaps another trend, I mean, say it's super reliable. What else? If we're looking at the market competition out there, we're thinking about what's rising, what's falling back. What do you see in those terms for 2022?
So what we see more and more is MongoDB has always been focused on developers. When it first came out, the idea was you could just code easy, easy, easy. And SQL is a language which looks like English. And you type in English, and it's kind of natural to type in English, but it was very unnatural to do SQL in a programming language. So there you are, you're a developer, you got out of MIT or Caltech or whatever, and you love writing programs. And all of a sudden you're told to write programs using this English language thing called SQL. So what we did was we built drivers that let your data structures in the program exactly map to your data structures in the database. And so what we find is that developers can move faster and faster and faster and more naturally without like a translation layer. Imagine you were running a business and everything you had to do, you had to talk to a team that didn't speak your language and everything had to be translated. That's what traditional databases are. Modern databases like MongoDB scale up when you need them to, are on every cloud, let you stay up even if one of the clouds goes down, and are easy to program against. And so the reality is, much to my disbelief, is that things keep accelerating. I kind of thought, the speed of tech would plateau.
Right.
There are now companies that are looking to deploy production apps in 2 weeks. And that would be unheard of when I grew up. And so what we focus on, and what I think is the real change, and what I think C-level executives need to be focused on, is how fast can I deploy an application? How fast can I iterate on that application? And here's the third one. How predictably can I schedule application deployment? Because developers will tell you they can move fast, but if it's not predictable, how can you base your business on it? And in particular, that has come up so strongly with COVID, because businesses have gotten themselves into this situation where if there's a new COVID mandate in your country and you can't roll out an app that makes your business available to consumers in 2 weeks, you're literally out of business.
You're losing money big time. Yep.
Yeah, and you can't afford that. And so, I am so passionate about making two things happen. Application developers really, really happy and really, really delighted and really empowered. And we can talk about that with the innovation tax. And then second, applications themselves be reliable, easy to iterate, easy to develop, easy to distribute, and easy to keep up. And those are two things: developing applications and running applications.
Interesting. So you've written a couple, I think, very interesting blog posts. You wrote one about something called the innovation tax, the idea that clunky processes and outdated technologies make it harder for engineering teams to produce great tech. I mean, what's the insight into the innovation tax, and how can we avoid it?
So the insight there, which I came to over 3 decades of watching teams, both under me and at other companies, struggle to be productive, is that there are very subtle things that destroy a developer's productivity. Developers need to be what's called in flow. And that's the same for a lot of professions. I don't mean to be arrogant there. Right. And in flow is when literally you can't get the program out of your head faster than your fingers can type. And the reason that's so valuable is because that's when the real 10x improvements occur. So what I started doing about 15 years ago is I started focusing on what things stop people from being in flow. One is tools that don't work. And we can make development tools better and better and better. And of course, MongoDB and other people are working on that. The other one is management that doesn't understand how to let developers get stuff done. And that means giving them the information they need about the business. Don't go throw your developer in a little room in a cubby and give them a spec. Bring your developers, and I did a piece called The Empowered Developer, bring your developers into the business conversation so that when they're sitting there just typing as quick as they can, they go, oh, this will make sense for the customer. So what you got to do is imagine that loop of customer needs and developers typing, and you got to figure out every single piece that gets in the middle of that, and that's the tax. And it's different for every company.
So it's really about moving things faster and faster, which relates to another blog post you wrote, which I think is very cool. It's about engineering teams and how there's something called a Goldilocks gauge of just the right size of team to make things really happen. What's going on there?
So one of the things that I had the privilege of doing in my career was I ran the fleet for the Amazon Relational Database Service, one of the largest fleets in the world at that time. And I learned so much. And one of the things I learned is that a fleet, which you deploy software to, a fleet of maybe 1 million or 2 million machines, is like a living, breathing beast.
Right.
And when you deploy software to it, it's like you're feeding the beast or you're hurting the beast. And I'll get to this. So what happens is when you deploy a new piece of software to that fleet, if you do it wrong, you can cause huge damage to your customers, to your business, et cetera. At the same time, if you get too paranoid, you're never going to deploy software.
Right.
I mean, of
Gotta be a
course,
balance there.
as one boss told me at one time, and I won't say their name, but they run a very large company. If you want to have no outages, we just won't deploy software. Because it turns out, and this was both from AWS and my time at Grab, a very strange number, 68% of our downtime minutes were caused by bad deployments. Now,
the software itself was faulty.
yeah, so 32% were caused by other things like network failures or other weird things happening. 68% of downtime minutes were caused by bad software deployments. So how do you fix that? Well, the first thing I talked about was Z deployments, or the 180 rule, where you roll software to the fleet and you have computers decide to roll it back really quickly. That's thing one. Thing two was Z deployments, where you actually roll your software and you test rolling it back, because most people don't test rollbacks.
Right.
And then the third blog post, the one that you're talking about, is Goldilocks, is you don't want to deploy every line of code to the fleet. That's just a waste of time and energy. But you also don't want to do this waterfall thing where you deploy once a quarter or once a year. And the reason that's so important is because the human brain can only hold so much in it at once. And if you deploy a piece of software, which you've been working on with a team of 200 people for a quarter, no one can hold the complexity of their software, of that software in their head. And so when something goes wrong, it takes hours to figure it out. You need to deploy once a week. And that's a magic number. If you can deploy new software once a week, it's current in everybody's head, nobody's on vacation. And when something happens that goes wrong, people go, I know what that is, I'll fix it. And so the Goldilocks gauge is like the Goldilocks thing, where it's like, this porridge is too hot, this porridge is too cold. This deployment is too big, or this deployment is too small. And as a senior leader, if you talk to your teams about your deployments in this way, you will find them loving you. Because most executive leaders talk about, when do I get this feature? How much money are you spending? Why did you have those outage minutes? And if you go to the next level, which is you talk to them about what they're really doing, which is deploying software, they love you, and you start a conversation which is far more fruitful.
Well, you know, it's ironic that I mean, I love the week figure, because it allows everyone's mind to stay grasped on the software. It's not too big, they haven't lost it all. But the irony is sort of that even at this very cutting edge of very advanced technology, it still comes down to the human brain and the human mind and what we can comprehend and keep inside our little skulls. It still has not transcended that very human element.
No, it has not. And in fact, one of the things that humbles me is that the software systems we deploy defy, at the level of complexity, the human brains that deployed them. I mean, if you look at any of the cloud outages that have gone on for more than 10 minutes, it's because there are literally hundreds of humans on the line trying to figure out how their software is interacting with each other. Okay, it's just the way it is. So instead of us figuring it out, we need to teach the computers to figure it out. And that's what Z deployments and the 180 rule are about, which is stop trying to be smart, teach the computers to be smart. And while it feels like you're slowing down a little bit to put all these frameworks in place, you're actually doing two things. You are speeding up, but I'm telling you right now, the difference between a 5-minute outage and a 2-hour outage can mean whether or not you make your numbers for the quarter as a public company. Because the trust you lose in a 2-hour outage, it's game changing. And so as a company, the executives, and I don't just mean the CTO and CIO, I mean the CRO, the CFO, the COO, they need to care about this stuff as well, because like you said before we started recording, software truly is being a major factor in the world. And if companies don't get their software right, that really kind of means they're not getting their business right.
So, all right, with all that, let's think big picture. I mean, what is the future hold, and what is the future of databases and/or data over the next several years? And I'm waiting for you to say, oh, it's going to be all AI based, because as you mentioned, we need to teach the computers to do the work for us, which sounds sort of like autonomous / AI. So, you know, ball in your court, what is the future of databases?
So that's such a fun topic. So there's multiple kinds of AI. One kind of AI is the AI that looks at your fleet and figure out what's going wrong and alerts. And, you know, AI may or may not be valuable in that area. The other kind of AI is like, you want to do, you know, someone has a shopping cart and you want to give a verdict within 100 milliseconds of whether or not this is likely a fraudulent transaction or not. Otherwise, you have to let the transaction go through or you lose the customer. So the thing that's happening over the next couple of years is, number one, everything's moving to managed services, because developers need to spend that limited mental capacity on their business value. So if you open up those developers to the business context, like I said, then help them spend time there. Second, everyone wants to go serverless, elastic, etc., so that they're not worried about their infrastructure.
Right.
Third, everybody needs to go multi-region and multi-cloud. Apps can't go down anymore. And I don't mean play apps. I don't mean an app that's, running in your marketing department to just go figure out one promotion. I mean the app which is literally your mission critical app. And so with MongoDB, we offer multi-region. We let you run on any cloud you want. We let you run on premise. We let you run cross-cloud. And more, what you're seeing is that governments and financial regulators are demanding these things. And I think when you ask what the future of databases is, I think that any database that doesn't have a multi-cloud future is not going to be a mission critical database in 3 or 4 years, because their regulatory bodies are going to say you can't choose that database. And then finally, with regards to AI, I believe that AI is incredibly powerful to help make business decisions based on data. And so companies are federating their OLTP, their real-time analytics, and their data warehousing. But what we're seeing is traditional data warehousing, like the Snowflakes of the world and the Oracle data warehouse, becoming less and less relevant. What we're seeing is people want to make simpler decisions faster. They want to make tens of thousands of decisions per second with maybe 10 to 100 milliseconds of delay, which is very different than the business analyst staring at their data warehouse and deciding whether they should sell sofas in Ohio or not.
Right.
So that's what I think is going to happen.
It's pretty cool. The one piece I want to make sure I understand, perhaps just for my education, you talked about everything going to managed services. I mean, and the reality is, in the IT sector, different terms are used in a number of different ways, and one of them is managed services. When I think about managed services, it's often an outsourced third party handling things for you, so that you don't have to do it yourself, and it frees you up to do what you really do best. What do you mean by everything moves to managed services in the way you used it?
And so I'm going to come out pretty opinionated here and take a risk. So when I look at the fastest moving companies, the companies that are on the bleeding edge of innovation, they're not outsourcing their innovation. They can't. They just can't. I did a piece with a very large healthcare company, and they were so excited about it that they got 800 people on a call with me, their engineers, and they titled the piece "Relational Technology Stifling Innovation at Company Name." I won't say the company name. And what we learned was they had outsourced so much of their innovation that they couldn't innovate fast, because all the friction of having an outsourced company and all that. Now, there are some places that's appropriate, but not for the fast moving companies. So when I say managed services, I mean developers inside a company who own the stock of the company, who are motivated by that company, not by some contract. They're going out there and they're innovating day in and day out and day in and day out on the business value for that company. And so a managed service there is an endpoint in AWS or Azure or GCP or any of the national clouds that are coming up, where they don't have to think about the underlying infrastructure. That's what I mean by managed services.
You mean using a remote cloud provider?
Yes, using a remote cloud provider, but not only using a remote cloud provider, because they provide almost the commoditized compute. They provide, like, imagine you were building a house and your contractor built a beautiful house that had walls and a ceiling and security and electricity and water. Great. That's the cloud providers. But I'm not going to have my builder build my China cabinet where I'm going to put my furniture in it.
Right.
And that China cabinet is going to be built by craftsmen like MongoDB or like some of the other third parties out there. And I'm going to put my data, which is my China, I'm going to put that in a custom built for purpose thing. So the cloud providers are great to give us this kind of the framework of the houses. But third party providers like us are building these best of breed solutions, which run across all of the clouds.
All right, so when you said everyone's going to managed services, you meant everyone is using, the hyperscalers.
Everyone is using the hyperscalers for that commoditized CPU storage, et cetera. And everyone is moving to best of breed services like MongoDB that are not run by the cloud providers because they need to be multi-region, multi-cloud, multi-vendor, et cetera.
Gotcha. Mark, I think you've said it, and it's fascinating. Let's watch the sector as the years go on. I hope you come back and talk with us sometime, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the time today, James. It's been a pleasure.